Yeah, I appreciate you for taking the time to speak with me. Super excited that we have a chance to connect and I have an opportunity to learn more from you about what you're interested in right now as an investor and what you find exciting. One of the things I felt like we can start off with was just kind of getting your perspective on the evolving landscape of early stage, growth stage startups, and really about the relationship between venture capital and these companies that are now being founded, and specifically around what are the requirements now that, we have companies going from, 0 to 20 million AAR in, 6 or 8 months, right? And how that affects the way you and other investors are looking at these particular companies and considering deals moving forward.
Totally. It's a really good question, and something that I'm thinking about a lot, and I think a lot of investors, particularly venture capital investors, are thinking about. So maybe to start, to give a little bit of framing on myself, I spend all of my time thinking about AI native and AI enabled software businesses, mostly focused on B2B and look a bit enterprise as well as vertical AI applications. But I am multi-stage, so I can look at deals that are in companies that are seed, kind of just an idea and a person, but I can also invest in later stage companies. And so maybe I think that's helpful framing because it will help kind of drive how I think about businesses and I assess them. I think the biggest change in the market, especially in the last, I'd say 18 to 24 months, is companies, as you already referenced, are growing really quickly. So we are seeing businesses now go 0 to 2, 0 to 5, 0 to 10 million of ARR in 12, 18 months. And that's something that traditionally was very rare, if not unheard of in kind of previous cycles. I think one of the reasons we're seeing that is because I fundamentally believe that AI is a transformational technology. There will be thousands of companies that are able to service tons of consumers and business users who really want to use AI. But as a result of this real need and interest in the market, we're seeing companies grow very quickly. So when you see lots of companies doing amazing top line growth, it begins to change the way in which you think about assessing those businesses, particularly for investment. So I would say that today the bar is much higher. If you are a business that is trying to fundraise in particular, you do want to think about kind of how do my metrics line up with what's best in class today. And best in class definitely is kind of growing 2, 3, 4x year over year. But I think something that's even more unique or nuanced about what we're seeing in kind of the new AI native business space is that these companies are also building with much smaller teams. So while they are growing very quickly, we're not seeing them add as many people to their headcount as they maybe would have historically. Maybe a company that was at 10 million of ARR in the past had 20, 30 people. Today, 10 million ARR businesses have 4 people, 5 people. And how can they do that? They're actually also using AI tools to build their companies. And so something that I'm thinking a lot about is, while top line growth is really important, will always remain kind of a North Star metric, I am thinking a lot about assessing those businesses as well, of how much do you actually use AI to build your company? Because I do think that those are the types of businesses and the types of entrepreneurs that are thinking in unique ways and are going to ultimately succeed in this market.
That's really interesting. Yeah. What's the relationship then with, I guess, companies becoming more efficient and then their capital needs, and then subsequently check sizes, the frequency of investments that follow as a result of that?
It's a great question. And again, something that we're constantly contemplating at my firm, notable, but I think the market is considering this broadly too. If companies are growing much more quickly and they can do so with less people, capital needs are shifting, where you maybe wanted to raise really large rounds in order to hire people or to invest in some large strategic initiative. Perhaps you don't need to do that in the same ways that you did before. We are still seeing companies fundraise. So I'm not saying, I'm not worried about the state of the VC market overall. I think companies will still need capital. They'll still need financing to kind of move ahead. But where and when they fundraise is different now. So I'd argue that a lot of companies, again, are going out of the gate, maybe not bootstrapping because they are taking on some venture capital, but maybe raising kind of pre-seed rounds that get them to Series A metrics, and then they decide to raise, or they're deciding to actually raise large rounds at the seed or the Series A, such that they can get pretty far along in their journey from an ARR perspective, and then maybe even jump to Series C, D metrics, which again, historically was not the case. So I think in summary, we are seeing companies kind of shift their fundraising strategies. They are either going longer with less, And transparently, that's what most of them are doing. But then I think the ones that are raising, they're raising much bigger rounds with the idea that I know we can use this capital for a very long time horizon and probably jump over some of these other kind of Series B or Series C milestones and maybe get close to like pre-IPO range without needing a ton more capital.
Wow, that's incredible, actually.
Yeah.
And I'm interested for these companies that are growing like crazy. I would imagine team size being reduced 4 or 5x. A lot more likely that these companies are hitting profitability earlier and therefore burning less cash. So when companies are raising these rounds, let's say a Series A or Series B round, where, for example, historically those rounds would have gone to, growth, increasing the number of teammates that you have, number of new hires for different roles and functions. Where are you seeing shifts in the way companies are spending money now when they're raising these rounds?
That's really interesting because I still think actually that where they're putting the money is the same. It's just how much they're investing at each phase is what's shifting. So you still need people to run a business, right? And maybe today these AI native companies have less people, but over time you will need fundamentally a marketing person to manage the AI tool, or you'll need a go-to-market leader to manage the AI BDR, SDR tool. So they're still investing in people, but I would say that they are looking now and investing in people who can maybe play multiple roles versus kind of folks who are just strategic in one core area. So I'm finding that a lot of companies are obviously always looking for software engineers, but outside of that role, I think people are looking for maybe go-to-market leaders who can really flex some kind of revenue, expertise, but then simultaneously maybe have comfort running marketing and some of those functions because they want to go longer before hiring and kind of building out a full marketing function. So I'd say hiring is still a major priority when they're fundraising. They're just prolonging when they decide to kind of expand teams. And then I'd say the second area that is perhaps a bit unique is we are seeing a lot of folks, like I mentioned, like really spend a lot of capital on other AI vendors. So they're investing in companies like Cursor, or they're investing in using tools like Windsurf to help them with code generation, or they're investing in AI go-to-market tooling to help them, fix inbound and outbound. And so I do think while, again, early stage companies have always relied on other software vendors, I think now because these software companies can 10x your productivity, a lot of early stage companies are also thinking like, okay, if I have to make the trade-off between hiring a person who's going to be a full-time headcount or investing in an AI tool that I can have maybe a much more junior person, or I myself as an entrepreneur and CEO can leverage to execute the same work at a similar quality, maybe I'll put dollars towards that right now.
Excellent. It seems like there is kind of this bifurcation as well happening with startup founders, where you have the founders who are extremely ambitious, have these grand visions to go not only from a startup small business, but to an actual enterprise, public company one day. And obviously that's what venture capital has always been there for those founders and companies who have that ambition. But now, given the changes in the way that people are building companies, how quickly they're growing with as few resources as they have now, there's this really strong incentive I'm observing for founders to kind of forego the hustle and the time to build an enterprise and to perhaps be content with a $10 to $50 million lifestyle business, right? Again, there's always going to be a group of companies who want to go pursue venture capital, and we need that, right? As an economy, as a society. But it seems like there's going to be this like proliferation of founders who will be able to build these successful mid-sized small businesses, not necessarily small businesses, but mid-sized companies as lifestyle businesses. And then that has a lot of implications, as you mentioned, with the type of tooling that they'll need over time. And so demand for small business tools seems to be something that could be on the rise moving forward. Is that something you're seeing as well?
Yeah, I think related to what you're saying, I am very excited by the idea that there will be a proliferation of entrepreneurs that are building high growth, high velocity businesses that may not pursue venture capital. I think venture capital is a very specific type of financing, and it requires a very high hurdle rate in which kind of where you want your business to go. And I think there are amazing entrepreneurs who just may not want to pursue venture capital, as you said. And so I've already begun to see a lot of really interesting businesses that are growing really rapidly, and they're choosing to bootstrap, or they're profitable, in which case they don't really need to take on outside capital. And I think one kind of core area where I'm seeing that happen a lot, and I think there will be venture capital here at some point, is a lot of companies are now kind of service-based businesses and that are utilizing AI to supercharge them. So one area I've been focused on recently is kind of AI and marketing. And so there's a lot of marketing agencies, for example, who are deciding like, hey, if we leverage all of the best-in-class content creation, creative asset creation, maybe video editing tools, I can have an agency with 5 people, but I can service 50 clients. And so now I'm booking millions of revenue every year in a way that I couldn't do before. And so that I think that's just one interesting example of how there are these new types of businesses that are growing really fast, but maybe aren't kind of venture scaled right now. But to your point around kind of what I think about kind of the SMB ecosystem and what does that mean? Yes is like the short answer. I think that there will absolutely be tooling that is required for these kind of SMB businesses. I will say though, I think a lot of the best-in-class tools that are being built today that are enterprise-oriented, if you look at them behind the hood, majority of their revenue today are coming from SMBs. So it's not even if it will come. I think we're actually currently in that moment. I think that there are tons of entrepreneurs who are building smaller scale businesses today. And again, they may end up becoming the enterprises of tomorrow, but they are earlier stage companies. And they are the ones that are, again, using the companies that we all hear about every day that are growing really rapidly. So I'm particularly excited about that trend continuing. And I am also particularly excited about folks building tools that are very vertical specific for those types of mid-market businesses. Because, a mid-market healthcare clinic looks very different than, a logistics company. And there will need to be entrepreneurs that are building AI native solutions, not only for kind of mid-market companies or early stage companies, but also those companies within their specific vertical.
Are there any particular tools that are being used commonly across some of these verticals? Or I guess, where are some particular verticals that have had a significant impact from some of these AI-enabled tools that have transformed their business and give them the ability to do things that they have never been able to do?
Yeah. So one area that I spent a lot of time in the broader AI ecosystem is in voice AI agents. And I'm happy to dive more into kind of what that means. But in short, we're at a point in which kind of voice AI infrastructure is getting good enough where you can actually replace a human phone call with a voice agent. And most people will not realize that that's happening. And even if they do, the voice agent is efficacious enough that it can kind of complete an end-to-end conversation and workflow with an end user. So I think that's a relevant category because there's actually a lot of companies that are building very specific vertical voice agents in ways that I think are pretty compelling. So in the voice ecosystem, some of those industries include healthcare. Healthcare to me rises as a very relevant and large category, but also one in which kind of vertical voice agents make a lot of sense because you can help with patient intake. You can do things like prior authorization. You can also do things like actually working through long tail kind of RCM workflows with voice agents today. And then outside of healthcare, we're also seeing a lot of activity in services. So Service Titan being a really good example of a vertical SaaS business that recently went public. There are companies now who are trying to tackle a similar category, but utilizing voice as their entryway. So there's businesses that can do things like helping you with inbound phone calls. If you are a home service company and you're just not able to pick up the volume of calls, they can help you with following up on scheduling to ensure that you're actually closing that business after something is booked. And then outside of home services, we're also seeing a lot of activity in financial services. And so financial services is particularly interesting because that's a highly regulated industry similar to healthcare. So I think as you start to get a lot of data around how customers interact with their bank, their credit union, you can also start to do interesting things like help them with following up on opening a new credit card or opening a new account. And now these banks can have much more one-to-one relationships with their customers in ways that they couldn't in the past.
What is there that's uniquely characteristic about some of those examples that you shared where being technologically enabled is insufficient relative to being AI voice enabled within their particular verticals and their workflows?
Yeah, I'd say the biggest difference in what I'm seeing from like an AI native voice company in particular, but I think this can be for kind of any company. that is thinking about like, if I'm AI enabled or native, why am I different? To me, it's one, the ability to really use data in a unique and valuable way. LLMs in particular are very good at ingesting data and then inferring kind of what the next step or what the next output should be. And so I think it's really interesting when I think about kind of vertical voice agents in particular, as they start to embed themselves and get a lot more data from their end customers. You can imagine what the power of LLMs will do there. You're not just kind of following a call script around how you interact with someone for a patient onboarding. You're actually utilizing real-time knowledge from an LLM to help you actually guide a customer through a journey, which feels much more natural and a much better customer experience. And then I'd also say, AI native businesses today, which maybe is a little bit different than in previous cycles, they are also able to kind of work across different modalities and work with their customers in a variety of ways much earlier than maybe in previous cycles. So maybe to clarify what that means, I'm talking a lot about voice AI, but a lot of the voice AI businesses also have chat features. They also have email functionality. Maybe they also are kind of a whole holistic communication suite. But in previous cycles, maybe it was much more difficult to kind of launch and go live with multiple different product modules. I would argue that a lot of AI native businesses, as a result of a lot of the AI tooling that they're using themselves, can actually go and develop new products much more quickly, test them in the market, and then start to sell them, which I think is really interesting because it's also a much quicker feedback loop. And it's much more iterative. If you have high product velocity, you're putting out products quickly, you're getting feedback from customers in real time, you can start to dictate your product roadmap much more fast.
Absolutely. I have a couple questions on that. That was really interesting. Yeah. And there's a lot there, actually, that I would love to just quickly unpack.
Yeah.
So first, the types of data that a AI native voice AI agent can collect from a phone call, from a patient, a partner, a user, whomever. How broad is that data set that they can collect? Is it merely just they're there to kind of facilitate a particular process, or do they have an opportunity to gather some of this very, very, very difficult data that historically LLMs haven't had access to, that they can now take and then reapply into the LLM and continue to gain competency and kind of accelerate its capabilities through these, phone calls in real time as well?
Yeah. I think that these companies are absolutely getting access to data that historically maybe folks had access to, but they weren't able to aggregate as easily and organize and then action upon. So, when I think about, for example, the use case in home services, most home service owners, so think, I'm the owner of an HVAC business. While I have a variety of phone agents who are completing phone calls and maybe answering calls from potential customers, or they're actually doing outbound calls to confirm scheduling, I don't actually have, as an owner, real insight on how those conversations went. I may have a script and I may have kind of the way in which I expect my phone agents to engage with customers, but over all the phone calls that are happening at any given day, I don't really have insight into that. However, with an AI voice agent, you have full visibility into how your agent is interacting with an end customer. This is not only because there's companies that are building actual dashboards that show you kind of end to end how these phone calls are going, but also the companies are legitimately transcribing most of these phone calls and giving you real-time insights. And the nice thing about voice agents are not necessarily meant to replace humans, full stop. They're actually here to be assistive to the human agent. So there's also a lot of workflows in these companies that just enable you to escalate, just like you and I have been on phone calls before, where maybe you escalated a previous generation version of an automated phone dialer. That's still the case. And so now you do have access to the ability to say, okay, when are we consistently needing to escalate to a human agent? You have a lot more insight there to understand that, maybe there's a nuance in language that a voice agent is using, or maybe we don't understand a particular customer request, and you can start actually now building that into your own business, which is really valuable data.
I read an article you wrote not too long ago on this particular topic of voice AI agents, and it was something in that article that stood out to me particularly, and I was hoping you can elaborate on what you meant by it, which was that the competition for AI agents is not technology or software, but it is labor itself. And so I thought that was a very like profound insight, and I wanted to, I thought it was very interesting, and I wanted you to elaborate on that and clarify that for me, because I thought it was very, very interesting.
Yeah. So when I talk about kind of AI voice agents really competing with labor, I mean that when you're talking to a potential customer, if you're a voice agent company, when the customer is thinking about, should I acquire or work with this business, they're really thinking about it as, I don't have headcount to complete this work. I think that is fundamentally like a major shift in how buyers are thinking about AI broadly. I think in the past, in SaaS, for example, amazing businesses were obviously built in our SaaS businesses, and I've invested in many of them as well. But those businesses were fundamentally around kind of how do you, make the current team that you have leverage these tools to do their work better or more efficiently. But less so that these agents, a SaaS business wasn't running autonomously. It couldn't complete a task on its own. But that is what we're really imagining in this new AI future. And so when I say kind of we're thinking about it as labor replacement, you're really thinking about it as like, how can this agent do a full workflow? And can they do it at the same efficacy, accuracy as a human? And if they can, then as a business owner, you can really begin to justify acquiring an AI agent tool because you're comparing it to a full-time employee's salary. And often, at least today, those things are not one-to-one.
Understood. Thank you for explaining that. And, as I was reading it and listening to you as well now, to me, it just was very interesting to think about, I guess, the implications or the revelation in terms of like human nature, right? In terms of, just kind of this prevalence of tooling everywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then comparing the value of tooling to the value of service. And now, like you said, we're in a position where software can now provide service, not just tooling. And I think that there's a huge demand for that, assuming the trust is there, assuming the effectiveness is there, reliability, things of that sort. But it definitely seems like more than a trend, kind of this shift away from kind of just pure SaaS tooling to actually task-based agents that complete the entire cycle for you. And it makes perfect sense to me that you all are there ready to position on that trend. But just thought about that as well from just like a human baseline perspective, which was very interesting to me.
And something that you're saying that I also think is an important thing to think about is there will be a lot of change management required, particularly with teams of workers around adopting AI tools. While we're in Silicon Valley and we're constantly thinking about AI, when I talk to business owners in some of the key verticals I talked about, like home services or logistics or even healthcare, there's hundreds, thousands of workers who are going to need to engage with AI tools to make their jobs and make their output even better. But they haven't all adopted it yet. And so I also think that there is this interesting place that we're in around kind of workforce development, helping and bringing people along the journey of learning around how AI can help them and help them do their jobs better. And I think that happens in parallel with AI tools getting better. I think this question around trust and like, can I trust that the output is accurate? Can I trust that, my data is safe? Those are all legitimate and real questions. And I think that's what the AI companies and the businesses I'm focused on investing in are trying to solve. But simultaneously, I am excited to see how businesses and workers are adapting and learning about the tooling. Because I do think, you can build the best tool in the world, but if no one's ready to use it, that's not helpful. And so we are starting to see this convergence of like builders alongside our workers learning and understanding the full scope of what AI can do for them.
Excellent. Another thing I wanted to talk about or ask you about as well is, I guess, you mentioned voice companies starting to integrate chat and email, and chat and email companies starting to integrate voice.
Yeah.
And one of the things that stands out in that insight to me is that it seems like there's a very interesting interplay between chat and voice in the sense that they both have trade-offs, but they're at opposite ends in the sense of, for example, it's much quicker for me to read something than it is for me to write something, right? The labor or the cumbersome part of the process comes in me trying to communicate via writing or typing, but reading is very, very fast and efficient. But when it comes to voice, I can communicate very quickly, much quicker than I can writing or typing, but I can only listen at the pace at which someone communicates, right? And at the pace I can process that information. And so when looking at the two, first of all, do you think that voice is superior to chat, or do they all have their particular roles and it's important for a company to integrate both to make sure that they're covering the client holistically in that regard?
Yeah, I would say that I think both have a place and a really important role in business users like lifestyle and workflow. I think voice in particular is just a really natural communication method. You and I are talking right now. It feels natural. I can understand you. We can engage. You can ask follow-up questions. It's just a lot more dynamic versus, like you suggested, text does kind of have limitations on how much you can kind of adjust and pivot in real time. But there are opportunities and reasons for why you need text-based communication in chat, whether that be having some form of a record or some type of email communication or others. So I'd argue that we will likely see both. But I do think as I suggested before, when I said kind of the underlying voice AI infrastructure stack is improving, one area where I think it lends itself to what you're discussing around chat is technologies like speech to text. So the technology that actually ingests and listens and transcribes speech into text in real time, that is improving very rapidly, which can mean that folks can engage via voice and then see transcriptions in real time, and they're highly accurate. So maybe, again, that's an example of taking voice, putting it into text or chat, because that's maybe a use case that you need. But also there's things that are evolving on the underlying infrastructure like speech to speech, which again, that can mean things like transforming our voices and then like you're in real time understanding it and then ingesting out another answer through another voice. And so I think those are relevant and interesting, because my hypothesis is maybe there is a world where voice becomes superior, but we just haven't had the technology yet to actually realize its full potential. And so that's why I and our team is super excited about the voice space, because there have been some really amazing innovations. And at least, I don't know, I do everything with voice now. I text via voice. I actually send emails now often in voice. And it's exciting to see what that could mean from user experiences.
So Chelcie, I appreciate you taking the time. I have one final question, and it's just about that AI infrastructure layer as well. And how do these companies remain competitive over time? So a lot of them, would be built on, or as wrappers, as an architecture. There are some who are building their own custom models, et cetera. But for those who are building on this AI infrastructure layer for voice, how does a company differentiate in that space, given that they're all kind of using the same tooling in going from there?
It's true. Probably the number one question I'm thinking about right now, because overall we're seeing a real democratization of technology and software building. So what was a technology moat maybe 5 years ago doesn't really exist in today's AI native world. And so, as you suggested, there are lots of companies that are building on orchestration platforms. So there's companies like Vappy, which provide folks with the ability to build their own voice agents, or companies like Retail that let you build a voice agent from scratch and do so much more easily than if you were to build it on your own. And so if you're looking at two companies that built on those stacks, you're like, wait, they're very similar. But the way that I think about it is, one, as I mentioned already, data becomes only increasingly important in this market where maybe the underlying technology is not as different. How do you get access to unique and proprietary data that you can then leverage to build better outputs and better experiences? And that's why I think vertical is really interesting, because it lends itself very well to that. If you maybe start with acquiring a certain type of healthcare provider, you get enough data. Now maybe you can start to graduate to more enterprise type healthcare organizations. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. I would then say the second area is going to be kind of customer segment or kind of your distribution. So like I already said, can you begin to really understand, maybe we're starting in mid-market, but can we start to move and expand into enterprise? This will obviously help you with contract sizes, ARR growth over time. but I think it's really important. And then I'd say the third area is going to be like we already described, like, can you expand in the workflow? So can you start with voice and then begin to see real evidence that you're being pulled towards other modalities? So are people asking for chat now? And can we service that? Or are people asking for email and can we service that? Because also, again, product velocity will always be important for early stage businesses. But I think particularly AI companies who want to differentiate and stand out, being able to really build great products quick and that customers want will be important.
Outstanding. Thank you so much for taking the time, Chelcie. I really appreciate you sharing your insights, and hopefully we can circle back in the future and revisit this conversation as things evolve in the market.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks so much for having me. This was awesome.